Before Michael Myers, before the masked menace of evil, there was a man. And behind the weary eyes of Dr. Loomis in Halloween, behind the stern resolve of Blofeld in You Only Live Twice, was a truth stranger and far darker than fiction. Donald Pleasence was a master of fear, one of the great architects of cinematic unease. His gaze could unsettle, his voice could chill. But there was something else behind the performances, something real. A lizzed darkness that couldn't be conjured on sound stages or written into scripts. Because Donald Pleasence didn't just act in horror, he survived it. In 1944, at the height of World War II, he was shot down over Nazi-occupied France and imprisoned in one of the Reich's most infamous prisoner of war camps, Stalag Luft I. What happens when a man who lived through the most brutal side of humanity decides to recreate it for the screen? What did Pleasence see behind barbed wire fences, and how did it shape the unforgettable, haunted characters he would later bring to life? This is not just the story of an actor. This is the story of a survivor. Donald Henry Pleasence was born on October 5, 1919, in Worksop, Nottinghamshire, a quiet town in the English Midlands. He was raised in a devout Methodist household, the son of a railway station master. Life was modest, structured, and introspective. From a young age, Donald was drawn not to noise, but to nuance, to the quiet intensity of storytelling and performance. After finishing school, he found work as a clerk and assistant stage manager at the Jersey Repertory Theatre. Though he began in the background, he quickly made his way onto the stage. He had a voice that carried not just sound, but weight. The kind of presence that didn't demand attention, it simply earned it. By the late 1930s, he was climbing the ladder of the British theatre scene. He was cast in Shakespearean productions, cutting his teeth in the works of the bard, and building a reputation for subtle intensity. But the rising tensions in Europe cast a long shadow. Hitler's aggression was no longer ignorable, and like many young men of conscience and duty, Donald enlisted. He joined the Royal Air Force, not as a pilot, but as a wireless operator with 166 Squadron, RAF Bomber Command. His job was critical. He was the voice that kept bombers connected in the chaos of night raids, the unseen lifeline in a sky filled with flag and fire. He had left the stage behind. Now he was headed straight into the darkest theater of all, war. The war changed everything. Flying in a Lancaster bomber as a wireless operator was among the most dangerous roles in World War II. British bombers flew deep into enemy territory at night, often without fighter escort, through blackened skies lit only by anti-aircraft explosions. It was a numbers game, and most crews didn't survive long enough to beat the odds. On August 31st, 1944, Pleasence's number came up. He was part of a mission over Aginville, France. The plane, a Lancaster, was hit by German anti-aircraft fire. Chaos erupted mid-flight. One engine caught fire, then another. As the aircraft spiraled toward the earth, the crew had no choice but to bail out. Pleasence parachuted into occupied territory, injured but alive. He was quickly captured by German forces and taken to Stalag Luft I, a POW camp in northern Germany near the Baltic Sea. It was notorious for housing Allied airmen and for its bleak conditions. Stalag Luft I wasn't a death camp, but it was a place where dreams died slowly. There were no executions, but there was suffering. Endless boredom, harsh winters, starvation rations, and worst of all, isolation. Officers were confined for weeks in wooden barracks behind electrified fences. Their only contact with the outside world was an occasional Red Cross parcel or a censored letter from home. For Donald Pleasence, survival became psychological warfare. Yet even in those confines, he found a way to resist. He organized small plays for fellow prisoners, light performances, even improvised sketches. Humor and imagination became weapons against despair. But the trauma was unavoidable. Malnutrition drained his body. The constant fear of execution, always a possibility for captured airmen, hollowed his nerves. The cold seeped into his bones and stayed there, long after liberation. In later interviews, he rarely spoke of what he saw, but those who knew him noticed something in his silence. A weight, a shadow, as if part of him had never left that barbed wire world. Pleasence remained in the camp until its liberation in 1945 by advancing Soviet forces. By that point, he was skeletal, haunted, alive, but not untouched. Decades later, in The Great Escape, he would play a British prisoner of war with increasing blindness. He wasn't just acting, he was remembering. Because in Stalag Luft I, Donald Pleasence didn't just lose freedom. He lost the illusion that humanity was inherently good. In May 1945, the war ended for Donald Pleasence, but the battle did not. When Soviet troops liberated Stalag Luft I, they found over 9,000 Allied airmen, emaciated, disoriented, and emotionally fractured. Pleasence was among them. He returned to England with his body intact, but his spirit frayed. PTSD wasn't a recognized diagnosis then, not in the military, not in medicine. What we now call trauma, they called nerves. And the solution was to move on, get busy, forget. But forgetting wasn't an option. Pleasence went back to what he knew, the stage. Acting became not just a career, but therapy. A safe place to project, to control, to reprocess. In the illusion of theater, he could rebuild something of himself. He married. He worked. He rarely discussed the war in public. But his roles began to change. He didn't play cheerful everymen. He portrayed haunted men, damaged souls, twisted villains. Directors noticed his intensity, his ability to convey dread without saying a word. And they kept casting him in roles that required emotional depth, carved by real pain. In his work, there was always a flicker of something true, something unspeakable. Even when playing monsters, he played them like men who had once been human. He never glamorized suffering. He just understood it. And so began the second act of Donald Pleasence's life. A man rebuilt not through denial, but through art. Donald Pleasence appeared in over 200 films and television shows. He became a cult icon, a symbol of intelligent horror and emotional precision. Even when cast in low-budget genre films, he elevated them, bringing gravitas to madness and humanity to villains. But he never fully explained himself. He never marketed his trauma. He never sought pity. He simply was. Those who worked with him described him as gentle, introspective, intensely professional. He died in 1995 at the age of 75, never forgetting, never boasting. We remember him now for his eerie calm, his unshakable stare, his chilling words. But maybe we should also remember the boy who leapt from a burning plane, the man who spent months starving behind enemy lines, the survivor who turned horror into art, not to scare us, but to show us what survival looks like. Because the scariest man in Hollywood wasn't terrifying because he played monsters. He was terrifying because he knew monsters were real. And maybe the question isn't how he brought darkness to the screen, but how many other survivors carried that same darkness, silently, forever. What do we owe to those who never told their full story? What did Donald Pleasence bury so we could simply be entertained. If this story moved you, take a moment to honor it. Like the video if you believe stories like Donald Pleasence's deserve to be remembered, not just for the fame, but for the quiet resilience behind it. Leave a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe for more haunting human stories from the shadows of history and Hollywood.